to have a shift in our identity is so important because it shifts everything. When your identity shifts, it's not just your identity shifts, that you see yourself differently, that you see yourself in some other way than you saw yourself. But when your identity shifts, you realize everything shifts along with it. Your entire worldview shifts. Your thought and view on everything shifts when your identity shifts. This is why it's so often emphasized, way back to ancient times, know thyself. Right? Or as Jesus would say, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you, and if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And it may seem mysterious and mystical kind of saying, but it's actually quite eminently practical. Mm-hmm. That if we do not bring forth the truth of ourselves, then the fact that we have not brought forth the truth of ourselves we end up destroying ourselves. Not only ourselves individually, but we destroy each other in the process. So when we do not bring forth the truth within ourselves, the mere fact that we don't bring it forth is what destroys us, is what causes so much, as the Buddhists would say, the normal amount of hate, ignorance, and greed. And if you wonder what the normal amount of hate, ignorance, or greed, it's the amount that's happening all around you, which is a shocking amount actually. But it's normal. Normal in the sense that that's what's happening. So that's one line of development. And as those of you who've come to see me before know that I put a lot of attention on that question of what you really are. It's sort of, in one sense, it's a fundamental spiritual question. And for a lot of people have a trouble even being interested in that question. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people say, that question really doesn't do it for me. It doesn't really, which is okay. But you see, our entrenched identity usually isn't very happy about being questioned. Because when we question our identity, we're questioning everything, right? When you question something close to your identity, people get rather testy. Do you know that old joke, if you want to ruin a party, talk about religion or politics when you go to it? Right? Because those things, among others, those are getting closer to your core, right? And we can see that when we turn on TV, we see just this endless sort of political, we don't see a debate anymore, unfortunately. We just see arguing. We see a continuous argument politically. And of course, spiritually, we don't even touch that for the most part. That's just like out of bounds, because that'll upset people almost immediately if you start to question any of that, right? Because these are very close to the core of our identity. So spirituality actually aims deeper even than those aspects of identity. It aims right at the core identity. What are you really? I won't bore you with that because I talk about that so much, about the inquiry. What am I really? And as I often say, the question is, you're not looking for an answer necessarily. The question isn't meant so you can find a new answer, a new, better version of you see? Because whatever you find is a new, better version of you will just be that. It'll be a new, better version of you. It won't be true, though. So the question is not meant to find a better version of you. It's to disassemble the version that you have made up, that we've all made up, right? That we culturally assume and we individually assume, that identity, whatever it is. I remember when someone I didn't plan on this, of course. This was quite a surprise to me, but it was a great moment. I've told this story before, but not for quite a while. It was when I was backpacking, which I used to do an awful lot of in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and one day I was way out in the backcountry, and I came upon this old man. When I started to talk, he was sitting by his fire and hanging out, and I went over, and he was just a little off the trail, and he had set up his camp late in the afternoon, and I stopped by for a little bit, and I started to talk to him, and he said that he was he said he was 75 years old, and he thought he'd come out there to see what kind of what kind of work God created out there in the wilderness. Just a great reason to go to the wilderness. Do you know? Like, what's it like out there? That was his sort of notion. I wanted to see what it was like out here. But instead of saying I wanted to see what it was like out here, he said I wanted to see what God created out here. So I'm interested already. You know, I'm like 22 years old, 23 years old, you know. And if someone just said I wanted to see what, was created out here, I mean, okay, I'm doing that too. But the way he put it, I kind of got interested. Anyway, at that time I used to wear this Buddhist mala, which is really just like in Western terms would be a rosary, a Buddhist rosary really is what it is, with beads on it. I wore it around because I very much identified myself with being a Buddhist. I was a young Buddhist. I was in there my first 2 or 3 years of being a Buddhist. Of course, being a Buddhist is an identity too. It's a good one, especially when it's new. You ever notice that when identities are new, they basically feel better than when they're old? Sort of like bodies. So I was this new, aspiring, budding Buddhist, and I had this thing, and he noticed that around my wrist very quickly. And he asked me what it was, and I said, well, it's like a Buddhist, rosary. The first, just like that, he just goes, Buddha was an asshole. Now, I can't tell you why I heard this the way I did, but you may have had moments like this. That kind of just the words you would think would have provoked a reaction in me, right? You would think 9 times, when someone says that, when you tell them your religion and they immediately, say something like that, most people are really going to be taken aback. But every once in a while, someone can say something like that can sound insulting, but you're not insulted. And oftentimes it's because of where it was said from. Not what was said, but where it was said from. And that's kind of like what happened with me. It took me aback. And what it did actually was make me interested in this guy. I thought, this is interesting. And then we went on to talk about that a little bit. And we had this delightful conversation. And I've always loved, from the time I was very young, I always loved people like this guy, people that are completely straight out themselves. You know those kind of people who don't give a rip whether you like them or not. People like that are delightful, right? They're really fun. Anyway, what he did me a tremendous favor, which I didn't know that he did at the time. But he did this really tremendous favor for me, was somehow what he said at the time he said it, and most importantly, how he said it and where he said it from. He basically, it was like he took an arrow and shot it right in the heart of my Buddhist identity. And I just walked away with this unseeable arrow right in the core of that Buddhist identity. And he just shot this arrow. And it didn't fall away immediately. It took some time for it to fall away. The identity, the Buddhism part, that's fine. I continue with that for a very long time with my own teacher. But the identity part was wounded, but wounded in a good way. Maybe I could say pierced. It was pierced. Which actually allowed me some 2 or 3 years later to actually wake up not only from the Buddhist identity, but from all the rest of identity. But I look back and really, I always thought, I imagine that guy's dead now, but boy, I'd thank him if I could.